and welcome to another episode of Live Harp Lesson. My name is Susanna and I'm a harpist and harp teacher based in Edinburgh, Scotland. Let me know if you can see me alright, if you can hear me alright, if you're watching this episode live. I hope it will all work for those of you who are watching the replay. I'm going to just check quickly on my phone if everything worked on Facebook for the live version of this lesson. Let me just refresh that and see if the video displays as it should be. And I'll be right with you because we've got a very interesting topic today. Seems to be working fine, although I see my own picture right now, so I'm not quite sure. Please let me know if you're on the other side, and please swipe to the next bit if you're watching that replay later in case there are any problems. Seems to be doing alright. Okay. Today's topic is something which will be especially interesting to beginners who are learning to play the harp at the same time as reading the music, so learning music theory in order to play the harp. Because today we're going to talk about practice strategies for spotting patterns, spotting repeated sections, something that will make your practice more efficient and save you a lot of time in the long run. Before we get to the essence of today's lesson, make sure you download the PDF for today's session. You will find lots of useful examples there, and you will find it much more useful to make the most of this lesson when you're following the examples that are in the PDF. So use the link that you will find in the description of this Facebook Live. Subscribe to the list if you're not a subscriber already. If you are, you will find the link there to download your materials. Then the next announcement is, as we're remembering nowadays how important it is to remember about washing our hands, making sure that we're not spending a lot of time in large crowds of people and so on and so on. I wanted to remind you about the article I've posted a while ago now, but it will be quite important for the harpists who find that their hands are more sensitive from frequent soap and water contact and possibly getting a bit more blistery. So if you want to know how to avoid blisters, find the link in the description of this Facebook Live. The article is called How to Avoid Blisters When Playing the Harp, and there was also a live harp lesson on that topic, which I will post the description to. Most of my students this term were seeing me in person, but this week we're gradually moving on to online lessons, or at least testing our equipment, and I'm very pleased to say that a lot of them were quite surprised how little difference is there between an in-person lesson and live lesson, and actually how comfortable it can be to have the lesson from the comfort of your own home on your own harp without worrying about many things like transport and so on. So we are all enjoying that, we are all fine. One more thing that I wanted to say, there are lots of useful resources also coming up, both for students finding themselves in that situation and for harp teachers. So I will post the links to those in the description of this Facebook Live, just so we don't spend too much time talking about that. Hopefully, if you're watching this live lesson a few months from today, from March 2020, you will just remember how stressful time it was, but all will be fine. But for now, there are all those things to take into account. Okay, I can't see any comments. I hope that those of you who are watching are all fine. Let me know, even if you're watching the replay. It's nice to hear where you're tuning in from and how are you managing where you are. Let's move on to today's topic. And if you're in for the music, stay until the very end, because especially due to the nature of today's topic, I will first explain the exercises and all the theoretical stuff before we get to play the pieces. Lots of students have been telling me that very often they want to hear the piece before they start playing it, just because it's so hard to figure out everything from the piece of paper. But stay with me, I will show you a few tricks how to make it a bit less overwhelming, and how spending a few moments with the score before you even listen to the piece can help you make your practice more efficient and make reading the music a bit less time consuming. So if you've got the PDF, that's the point number one on the list. We are leaving the notes for now, we're just looking at the rhythm. And when you look at the example of the piece that I'm using for today's lesson, that's Sound the Trumpets by Skyla Kanga, you will see that when we ignore the pitches of the notes, the rhythm that we will get will be 4 crotchets, 2 crotchets minim, and again 4 crotchets minim minim. And when you look for that rhythmic pattern in other parts of the piece, if you've got a whole piece in front of you, you will see that the same pattern repeats in line 2 and 4. The piece has only 4 lines, it's one page piece. I can actually show you how it looks on the paper, and you will probably see it very clearly how the rhythm repeats in lines 1, 2 and then 4, with line 3 being quite different. Now that you've got that, you are going to look at any repeating notes within your section. So when you're looking at that first example on the PDF, go below to point 2 and you will see that I've eliminated the notes that are repeating. So now we're just getting crochet, crochet, crochet meaning, or quarter note, quarter note, quarter note, half note if you're watching that from America, with different with different names for different rhythms. Then crochet, crochet, meaning. And when you have that, when you know which notes you are paying attention to, where the pitches are changing, you're going to go to the second page, and what we're going to do now, we are going to connect the dots now that we know which of them are repeating, meaning fingers staying on the same strings, and which will be different. So when you look at the point number 3, you will see that I've drawn lines showing how the pattern is changing. So from the first to second dot, we're going 2 steps down, and you can see that even without reading any of the notes, you can just see that the top note moved 2 spaces down, a line and a space, and the bottom note has done the same. Then they move just a step up, then the top note moves a step down, left hand goes much further down, then they both come back up together, go back to the same note. You might at that point notice that the second group from the end is the same one as 2 groups before. That's also very useful. And then they go splitting further. So that's already something very useful, because if you connect those dots, even if you don't do it on the paper, but just do a mental exercise of imagining those lines going next to your dots, then you will see that this pattern repeats as well in the second line and the fourth line, even though the notes might not look quite identical, and we will get to that in a second. Good morning, Lisa. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm glad that everything is working, really glad, and good to see you as always. Now, when we're seeing where our dots and lines are leading, we can compare it to the other sections, and when you're looking at the point 4 of the PDF, here I am comparing that first set of lines to lines from another section of the piece. And that's where it can get a bit tricky, because some of the notes might be going into the bass clef, as is the case in that piece. Some of them might go into hiding elsewhere. But if you have a longer look at that, you will probably see that the spacing and the distances are exactly the same, despite moving to the bass clef. Finally, where to look for differences? The patterns that we discussed here, those sections, are mostly identical, but the differences can very often hide in some specific places, and usually it's the same idea. The beginning of the phrase is exactly the same, and then the ending is often slightly different, as if someone's saying one thing and then just changing the very final point of the sentence. It's just same as we humans speak. Music speaks in exactly the same way. So make sure to check endings of the patterns. In this particular piece, the very last line, the very last bar will have a slightly different pattern. Left hand will go an octave lower instead of just staying on a whole note on the semi-brief, and the rest of it stays the same. And a final note about all that: please don't worry if you can't spot those patterns straight away, or that you only see them when someone, for example your teacher, points them out to you. You're learning, and it takes some time, and also every piece is different, and it takes, to say that in a very crude way, it takes some exposure to different pieces. It takes some time seeing how different composers were using those patterns and how they were making them similar, how they were making them different. Very often rhythm will be your first indication, so make sure you are very sensitive to the rhythm, point number 1, and then you will learn as you go along where to look for them and where to find them. So it all takes time. By doing little by little, you will get there. make sure that before you listen to the piece, you first spend a bit of time looking at the music and just comparing those things. Nothing prevents you from listening the piece later with the music and doing the same thing one more time. Then you will spot even more similarities, and as you hear the similar melodies returning, you will also see how they look on the paper, how they can change and how they can stay the same, what changes and what stays the same on the paper. So if you know the piece, if you've got the Minstrel's Gallery by Skyla Kanga, you can flip to number 8, otherwise you can keep following with the score. The first line of the piece is what you see on page 1, and then the second line of the piece is what you see in point number 4, page 2. And you will probably see that, you will probably hear that the third line is quite different, but fourth line is coming back to number 1. And as always, I will put a link in the description of that lesson to give those of you who want to buy the music an opportunity to do so, and a link to the shop. Okay, let me just move things around here, make sure that the music is in the right place, and that will be Sound the Trumpets by Skyla Kanga. That was Sound the Trumpets by Skyla Kanga. You may or may know that this piece is part of Grade 1 syllabus, and many teachers and students consider it to be one of the easiest pieces on the syllabus. And on one hand, I agree with that. It's only involving second fingers and thumbs only in the third line in the right hand. So when it comes to technical side of it, it's definitely rather on the easy side. However, the reading of the music can be quite complicated here, especially since you see that both hands are written on the same line in the treble clef, and the left hand only now and then jumps to the bass clef. That can be quite confusing. So when you're looking at the crotchet, stems pointing up, that's the right hand playing, and stems pointing down, that's the left hand playing. But sometimes you may get a bit confused here. So don't worry when you think that this is a Grade 1 piece and that it's one of the easiest on the list. It is still quite challenging to read the music. It's just not a very straightforward piece to notate on the page. The music can be very straightforward, but the way it's put graphically on the paper may mean that it's actually a bit more difficult than some of the pieces which are even on the higher grades list, and there's nothing to worry about. You just need to take each challenge as you go along. I hope you enjoyed that lesson. Let me know if you have any questions at all. As usual, you can message me, you can leave a comment under this lesson. I'm always looking forward to receiving suggestions of future topics. I'll just check if there's anything else that I wanted to remind you about. I surely wanted to remind you about the article on the blog, how to avoid blisters, what to do when you have to wash your hands frequently, and so on. Stay calm, not only when you're looking for patterns in the music, but also in life. And I hope you are all taking good care of yourself, and I will be looking forward to seeing you next week. If you know someone who learns to play the harp, do forward them the link to this video, and if you found it helpful, leave a comment. That's always very lovely to hear that what I do is useful for you. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye!